Hi Lead ALFs, this is Hazel Bird, and this is your content overview video for the January 30th ALF TOT that you'll be facilitating soon. This is your welcome slide, and since we'll have the music playing already when you guys arrive, just don't forget to turn off the music during this part once you welcome participants to the session and remind them to record their attendance. This is a great time to make connections to the theme. You can talk about how, as facilitators, we each bring unique skills and perspectives to our roles. Whenever I think about a mask, I think about how masks help us to either reveal, or sometimes it helps us reserve different aspects of who we are, and how masks symbolize the choice to reveal or conceal aspects of ourselves. Invite them to unmask their strengths and lean into their authentic self as we work together today. And then also to embrace the space to be genuine, to support each other, and to celebrate the strengths that make our facilitation as ALFs impactful and true to who we are. Next, you'll introduce the session signals. For this part, our lead ALFs will be coming up with your comeback song, your callback signal, and the go word that you're going to use for the session. You want to also use this time to remind ALFs to continue to take pictures for their Pechakuchas, which is coming up in March, and also to ensure that all of them have a copy of their documents for the session, which would include their handouts or their thought catchers, as well as their facilitation tools. Next, you'll do the community builder. This is one that you guys will decide on during Lead ALF training on the 16th. So on this slide, you will just add the directions or a summary of the directions, and you'll explain the purpose of the community builder and also what they'll be doing for this slide. For the next two slides, you'll be introducing yourselves. This can just be a brief introduction since most of them know you already. Kelly and I just kind of put some ideas of how you could add your pictures to the slides. We thought maybe the main facilitators would be on one slide, and then on the next slide you guys would have the back of the house facilitators, or I guess, I don't know if you would call them facilitators, but the other lead ALFs that play a role in this facilitation. But on the notes page, or in the notes section of the slide deck, there's a Canva template so that you guys can personalize these with your own pictures, and also feel free to use a different format than what we have here. This was just an idea that we had. And again, this was the second facilitator slide. You can rename it something different than facilitators. We imagine that this would be where you would introduce the lead ALFs who worked on the slide deck and also on the thought catcher. For this slide, you'll be going over the outcomes of the session, or in this case, the mission. You may either read this out loud to our ALFs, or you can allow them to read the outcomes independently. Okay, on this slide is where we connect our learning and our role to the AISD leadership definition. You can point out that our work is defined by the indicators as shown. So we have passion for the work. The indicator is planning and organization. And since we are a leader of others, those are the actions that we connect to in our work. Next, we have our power packs, or our commitments. Read these out loud, or have participants volunteer to read these. You want to make sure you're highlighting the fact that as ALFs, we're always wearing two hats, one as a learner, one as a facilitator, and then have them reflect on which commitment they are going to be focusing on throughout the session. Next, we are looking at our agenda. You can give participants or ALFs a moment to read through this and just make sure that you highlight that we'll be spending some time authentically practicing in preparation for their February facilitation. All right, this slide really just highlights the fact that today our work is going to be focused around adult learning principles number 1 and number 7, which is that adults must feel safe to learn and that adults want to learn. And then this brings us to our learning for the session, which is unleashing your presenting persona. You may remember this last year when we did this as one of our in one of our TOTs. So this slide is really just the intro slide, and on this slide you can ask them to just consider the fact that as we work to develop our leadership, one thing we can do is think about how we show up as facilitators, and that sometimes the way that we present is different from our everyday persona. But when you find your presenting persona, really what you're doing is you're magnifying your strengths while being authentic to who you are. So this slide here is not the one you're going to use, but I wanted to just give you an example of what ours looked like last year. And this slide is where I talked about my presenting persona. I talked about how even though I facilitated for years in professional learning, I didn't really realize what my presenting persona was until a couple of years ago. And I talked about when it happened. It was during an ALF TOT when it was just me facilitating. Jennifer wasn't there that day, but I was trying to channel my inner Jennifer, and it didn't work, right? Because I wasn't Jennifer. I had to be myself. So I talked about thinking about and reflecting what adjustments I had to make in order to be my authentic self. And the way I did that was to think about my strengths in my normal life and to magnify them. So my strengths were to use humor, be relatable, and being relatable and using storytelling. So for humor, I talked about how much I love to laugh, and generally I think I'm a funny person. But I really had to be intentional about how to incorporate humor. I wanted to make sure that I used those intentional choices so that I didn't go overboard, or that what the humor I was using was connected to what I was presenting. And then when I talked about being relatable, I think I talked about storytelling next. And I talked about how everything is an experience to me. So everything has a story. And when I'm presenting, I have to be intentional and thinking about what stories to tell, because I don't have to tell all of them. I don't want to keep rambling, but that's part of my intentional choices for one of my strengths. And then also being relatable. A lot of the stories I like to tell are about maybe a mishap or a misunderstanding that I had, and that sometimes I just overshare to people I've just met, especially if I'm nervous. So when presenting, I have to be intentional that I don't just ramble, and that, yes, I want to be relatable, but I also want to make sure that I'm not just going on and on about myself, right? So it's those tweaks that I made to my everyday persona. Those were mine. That's me being intentional about my choices and making time to authentically practice and get feedback from Jennifer and from Kelly to make sure that the things that I was saying and the language I was choosing was the best for what I was presenting. So that was just an example, but your slide actually looks like this. And Again, in the notes section of the slide deck, there's a template there in Canva so that you can add your picture here and add your name. And on the slide itself, you can write, you can change where it says strength 1, 2, and 3 to your strengths and what you want to talk about during this part. Here's another example of what Kelly's strengths are. Again, you don't have this slide on your slide deck, but this was just, we wanted to give another example of what it could be. So again, for the second presenting persona facilitator, this is what your slide will look like. And you can personalize this for your strengths and how they show up when you're facilitating. Again, you guys want to emphasize the intentional choices that you made with those strengths and how authentic practice and feedback play a big role in your success as a facilitator. And that's why we have those three words at the bottom. I guess there are more than 3 words, but those 3 things at the bottom, that's the same in both slides. And then in this slide, this is where they'll have an opportunity to find their own presenting persona. So in your explanation of the process, you can ask them to consider their 3 strengths as facilitators and give them 3 minutes to write their own independently, then 3 minutes to think about intentionality, right? What are some of the things they have to watch for, kind of like in the example that I gave for mine. And then they'll have 4 minutes to share with an elbow partner, so 2 minutes each to share. This next slide is where we make connections to our adult learning principles number 1 and 7. As ALFs, you guys will get to decide how our ALFs are going to present or how they're going to respond to these reflection questions. You have 10 minutes for this section, so together you guys can decide if they're talking to an elbow partner, if they are finding a new partner. But just keep in mind they have about 2 to 3 minutes for each question and to reflect on those. All right, this is the transition slide for when we start talking about the February department lead training that ALFs will be facilitating. One thing to highlight or one thing to point out is that although lead ALFs names are highlighted, the main role of the lead ALF is to support and help prepare ALFs for facilitation. So they will be the ones who will be the main facilitators. You also want to point out that there are different locations for the elementary department lead trainings. They will not be at the PDC, but even though they're not there, the PL department will be setting up each location. So that's something they don't need to worry about, but they do need to be there as early as possible to help welcome teachers as they arrive. They also want to add these dates and times for the calendars, so on their calendars, so that just as a reminder, I'm sure it'll be in the forefront of their minds after their training. And then of course the slide deck for the February department lead training, the intro slide is there so they can see what it looks like. Next, we'll go into content internalization. During this part, we will have printouts of each section of the department lead slide deck. Their main thing they're going to be doing is using their graphic organizer to go through each section and determine what's the purpose of each section and what do teachers need to know and walk away with. So they'll have, for this time, about 20 minutes to do their content internalization. After their content internalization, they'll have a 7-minute break. Encourage them to go use the restroom, and also remind them to take pictures throughout the session so that they have some options, or they have lots of pictures to choose from for their Pecha Kuchas in March. Then we'll go back after break to just a quick Q&A about the content that they'll be presenting. Hopefully during the content internalization part, they were able to jot down any questions that they had, or even before the session, hopefully they would have reviewed the slide deck and their materials so that if they do have questions, this is the time to ask. It might also be a great idea for lead ALFs to come up with some potential questions that your ALFs may ask so that you can have some responses prepared for those questions. Next, they'll have some time to plan for practice. We'll do this all in the same room. They will be working with their ALF facilitation team. So in this case, it's either 2 or 3 people. And during that time, they're going to assign or choose slides. They'll think about what language that they'll use for different parts, and then also what transitions will look like from facilitator to facilitator. I know in the past we've done this part a couple of different ways. Sometimes we had jigsaw partners, and sometimes that you guys just worked with your co-facilitator. We thought for this session, for this time, the best thing to do is to work with their co-facilitator so that they have a lot of time to really get to know them and be more comfortable with their facilitator. Okay, so after planning for practice, we are preparing to go into the practice rooms. This would be good to have add this to the participant guide so that they know exactly which rooms are going to be going in to prepare for authentic practice. And then on this slide, this is when we talk about why do we practice. This is actually a short video of Spider-Man practicing shooting his web. Remember, we practice to focus on areas where we need to grow, but we also practice to get better at the things we're already good at. Practice helps us automate our skills and processes. You get that muscle memory built up. And also because whenever we're observing, we're learning from each other. And then in this part, this is where you want to describe what authentic practice looks like. For us, that looks like including all parts of the script. So not saying, it shouldn't be like, this is what I would say. They're actually using the language that they plan to use during the session as much as possible. If there's a microphone in the room, please have them practice with the microphone. And then anytime there's an activity or a Q&A part in the actual facilitation, a brief pause for questions posed would be great, but they don't have to actually wait for the full time or use the whole time. This is our practice protocol. This would also be a great thing to have in the participant guide. But basically, you'll have 46 minutes to practice, to authentically practice. For groups that have 3 facilitators, that's about 8 minutes each, while you have 3 minutes to give them feedback. If you only have 2 facilitators practicing, then that means it's a little bit longer. Also, one thing we wanted to point out, that as leads, you can definitely use this time also, or some of this time, to model different sections. So if your ALFs are having a difficult time kind of visualizing what the facilitation would look like for a certain part, maybe it's directions for an activity, or they're just having trouble with what the language could look like, this would be a great time for leads to kind of model 1 or 2 slides for them just to show what those expectations look like. And then on this slide, you're just explaining what the feedback process will look like. For this, just be sure to emphasize the importance of feedback and talk about how much feedback helped you guys grow last year as ALFs. They'll need to bring some sticky notes because we might not already have sticky notes in the room for them since they are going to be in different rooms. But basically, we're using plus deltas and giving the sticky notes to the facilitator after they're done facilitating. Lead ALFs will also help with the feedback process or also give feedback to the presenting ALFs as well. Okay, and then this is when we transition into the practice rooms. We gave 7 minutes here so that they can take a small and quick break. We want to go ahead and start authentic practice right around 10:14 so that you have the full 46 minutes. And also remind them to bring sticky notes like before and to take pictures to document for their Pechakucha. It would be a good idea to also bring all of their materials so that they can start right at 10:14. So we have a hard stop at 11 o'clock. You want to make sure you're back in the main room by that time so that we can start into goal setting. So for this one, they are going to use their AIC facilitation tool. Please have them just take a moment to take a look at that tool and then also think about the feedback that they received during authentic practice. Think about the parts that they're good at, the parts that they need to still work on. And during this time, they can choose one area to receive feedback on. That form in that bit.ly is that same form that we've used last year where they're going to share their goal with us. And then this form will help us, or that goal is what we're going to be giving them feedback around during their facilitation in February. After they record their goal, then you guys will have an opportunity to have a team meeting with your ALFs. During this time, we want you to lead discussions over what their individual next steps are. One should be probably scheduling additional practice time because even though they practice authentically here, hopefully that's not the last time that they practice. So additional practice time doesn't have to necessarily be in person. They can meet over Zoom. They have different options. They can record each other and then send those recordings. But you want them to make sure that they use this team meeting as an opportunity to go ahead and get those practice times scheduled. And then this would be also a great time for you guys to schedule some check-ins with them so that, especially since they're already here in front of you, these check-ins can be however long you'd like them to be, because remember the purpose, we want to make sure that they are ready to facilitate in February. So however many check-ins, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once every other week, or however often you guys want to check in. And then also, so many of our ALFs have already gone through results coaching. Some of them may not have, but some of the material that they're presenting in February have talk about scarfing. So it may be a good idea to, as a next step, to review some of that scarf information. If there's something that they don't remember or they're not familiar with in the content that they're presenting, then a next step would also be to find information or get more information about it so that they have that to study. Then for our final reflection, you want to give ALFs some time to independently reflect on these two questions, and then you can either have them share with an elbow partner or invite ALFs to share out loud their responses to either one of these questions. And then lastly, this is our feedback slide. Please give them some time to complete this feedback. Remind them that this feedback survey is how we make sure that we're meeting their needs. And that feedback is also how we plan the sessions so that we know what works for them and what doesn't work. And then afterwards, you can thank them for coming. And then that's it. You can they can definitely help us bust the table. So any extra papers or extra materials can be placed at the tables near the back. And and that's pretty much it. Okay. Thank you guys. Let us know if you have any questions about any of these slides. And we are so excited to see you guys in action. Bye.